The concept of a safe community is something most of us take for granted. We walk through our local shopping centers, our neighborhoods, and our parks with an inherent belief that the social contract will protect us. We assume that the most vulnerable among us, our children, are shielded by a collective vigilance. But occasionally, an event occurs that shatters this foundational belief, leaving a permanent fracture in the psyche of a nation. In February of 1993, the town of Bootle, in Merseyside, England, became the epicenter of a tragedy so profound and so unprecedented that it fundamentally altered the global conversation surrounding child safety, the psychology of juvenile offenders, and the intricate workings of the criminal justice system. This is the comprehensive examination of the investigation into the loss of 2-year-old James Bulger, a case that demanded unparalleled forensic innovation, tested the boundaries of legal precedent, and forever changed the way society views the innocence of youth. To understand the magnitude of this investigation, one must first understand the setting. Bootle, a working-class town on the outskirts of Liverpool, was a close-knit community where neighbors knew one another and families went about their daily routines with a sense of familiar security. The New Strand Shopping Center was the bustling heart of this community. It was a typical Friday, February 12, 1993. Denise Bulger, a young mother, was running ordinary errands with her vibrant, trusting 2-year-old son, James. The shopping center was crowded, filled with the ambient noise of commerce and weekend preparations. Inside a local butcher shop, Denise briefly let go of her son's hand to retrieve her purse and pay for her items. In any other circumstance, a momentary lapse of physical contact in a crowded store would result in nothing more than a few seconds of panic, followed by a swift reunion. But in this precise, agonizingly brief window of time, the unimaginable occurred. When Denise looked down, James was gone. The immediate aftermath of a child vanishing in a public space is characterized by a rapidly escalating wave of panic. Denise frantically searched the immediate vicinity, calling out her son's name. Store employees and bystanders quickly joined the effort, assuming the toddler had merely wandered into an adjacent aisle or stepped just outside the storefront. Security personnel at the New Strand Shopping Center were alerted, and a standard lost child protocol was initiated. However, as minutes turned into an hour, the realization settled over the authorities that this was not a simple case of a wandering toddler. The Merseyside police were officially dispatched, and a massive, coordinated search operation began. In the early 1990s, closed-circuit television, or CCTV, was not the ubiquitous presence it is today. It was a relatively new tool for municipal security, often utilizing low-resolution cameras, recording onto standard VHS tapes. The New Strand Shopping Center happened to be equipped with one of these systems, positioned high above the concourse. Recognizing the critical importance of a visual timeline, investigators immediately commandeered the security tapes. The process of reviewing CCTV footage in 1993 was painstaking. There were no digital search functions or high-definition enhancements. Detectives had to sit in darkened rooms, manually rewinding and fast-forwarding through hours of grainy, black-and-white footage, searching for a needle in a haystack. Hours into the review, the investigative team found the moment that would define the case. On the screen, elevated above the crowds, the camera captured 2-year-old James standing near the exit of the butcher shop. And then, a sight that completely shifted the paradigm of the investigation unfolded. James was not taken by an adult. The footage revealed 2 older boys, who appeared to be no older than 10 or 11, approaching the toddler. One of the boys gently took James by the hand, and together, the 3 children walked out of the shopping center. The discovery of this footage sent shockwaves through the investigative command center. Up until that moment, every police protocol, every psychological profile, and every search parameter was based on the assumption that an adult abductor was responsible. The realization that the primary suspects were children themselves forced the Merseyside police to completely reevaluate their strategy. The grainy images were quickly isolated, printed, and distributed to patrol units and the national media. The public appeal was urgent, but it was also met with widespread disbelief. The psychological barrier of accepting that young children could orchestrate an abduction was an enormous hurdle for both the public and seasoned detectives. As the search expanded outward from the shopping center, investigators began to piece together the timeline of the boys' movements. What emerged was a chilling 2.5-mile journey across Liverpool, a path that was witnessed by dozens of individuals. In the days following the disappearance, police interviewed 38 separate witnesses who recalled seeing the trio. This phase of the investigation highlighted a deeply complex sociological phenomenon, often referred to as the bystander effect, compounded by societal norms regarding children. Many of the witnesses noted that the toddler was crying or seemed distressed, but almost all of them assumed that the older boys were his brothers. In 1993, it was not uncommon for older siblings to be tasked with looking after younger family members, even if the younger child was throwing a tantrum. A few adults did intervene, questioning the older boys about the crying toddler. In each instance, the 10-year-olds provided plausible, quick-witted excuses. They claimed they had found the lost boy and were taking him to the local police station, or that he was their little brother and they were heading home. The adults, satisfied with these seemingly innocent explanations, allowed them to continue. This aspect of the case would later become a subject of intense psychological and sociological study, examining how societal assumptions and the perceived innocence of youth can create a devastating blind spot in community vigilance. The journey ended near the Walton area of Liverpool, adjacent to a local railway line. It was here, 2 days after the disappearance, that the search reached its tragic conclusion. The discovery of the crime scene required an immediate shift from a search and rescue operation to a complex homicide investigation. The area was cordoned off, and forensic teams were brought in to meticulously process the site. Due to the sensitive nature of the case, the details of the crime scene were handled with the utmost clinical professionalism by the forensic pathology team. The medical examiner determined that the victim had sustained fatal blunt force trauma. The physical evidence left at the scene was extensive, but it required advanced forensic analysis to build a definitive link to the perpetrators. This is where the science of criminal investigation took center stage. In the world of forensic science, Locard's exchange principle is a foundational concept. It states that every contact leaves a trace. Whenever a perpetrator enters a crime scene, they bring something with them, and when they leave, they take something away. The Merseyside Police Forensic Unit relied heavily on this principle. During the examination of the railway line, investigators discovered several foreign elements that did not belong to the industrial environment. Among the most crucial discoveries was a specific type of blue modeling paint. This trace evidence was meticulously collected, catalogued, and sent to the laboratory for chemical composition analysis. Simultaneously, the public release of the CCTV images began to yield results. The tight-knit nature of the local community, while initially a blind spot, suddenly became the investigation's greatest asset. Anonymous tips began flooding into the police hotlines. Several callers identified the boys in the grainy footage as 10-year-olds John Venables and Robert Thompson. Both boys were known to local truancy officers and had a history of minor behavioral issues, but nothing in their background suggested a capacity for severe criminality. Acting on these credible tips, police arrested Venables and Thompson. The arrest of two 10-year-old boys for such a severe crime presented an unprecedented logistical and psychological challenge for the authorities. The standard interrogation techniques used for adult suspects were entirely inappropriate and legally inadmissible for children of this age. Specially trained officers, accompanied by social workers and the boys' parents, conducted the interviews. The psychological dynamics of the interrogation rooms were incredibly complex. Initially, both boys vehemently denied any involvement. They employed juvenile defense mechanisms, shifting blame, feigning ignorance, and attempting to outsmart the detectives. However, the police had a distinct advantage in the form of irrefutable forensic science. When the boys were taken into custody, their clothing and footwear were seized for analysis. The forensic laboratory conducted microscopic examinations of the garments. The results were devastatingly conclusive. Fibers, matching the specific fabric of James Bulger's clothing, were found on the clothing of the suspects. Furthermore, the distinct blue modeling paint recovered from the crime scene was found on the boys' garments. The chemical signature of the paint was a perfect match. In addition to fiber and chemical analysis, forensic footwear experts examined the shoes worn by the suspects. The impressions left at the crime scene were cast and compared against the intricate tread patterns of the boys' shoes. The unique wear and tear, the specific manufacturing marks, and the size all aligned perfectly with the evidence found at the railway line. The application of forensic science in this case was a masterclass in objective truth. While the suspects could lie, the microscopic fibers, the chemical compounds of the paint, and the physical impressions of the shoe treads could not. Confronted with the overwhelming weight of the forensic evidence, the boys' narratives began to fracture. The precise details of the interrogations revealed a chilling lack of comprehension regarding the permanence of their actions, highlighting the profound psychological differences between a child's mind and an adult's. Eventually, enough information was gathered, supported entirely by the forensic matrix, to formally charge John Venables and Robert Thompson. The decision to try the 10-year-olds as adults in a Crown Court set the stage for one of the most controversial and intensely scrutinized legal battles in modern British history. The trial took place at Preston Crown Court in November of 1993. The atmosphere surrounding the courthouse was electric with public outrage and sorrow. Security was unprecedented, as the authorities had to protect the juvenile defendants from a deeply traumatized and angry public. Inside the courtroom, the legal proceedings centered around a deeply historical and complex concept known in English law as doli in capax. This Latin term translates to incapable of deceit or incapable of crime. Historically, the law presumed that children under a certain age did not possess the cognitive development or moral maturity to fully understand the difference between right and wrong, and therefore could not be held criminally responsible for their actions. In 1993, the age of criminal responsibility in England and Wales was 10 years old. However, for children between the ages of 10 and 14, the prosecution bore a special burden. They had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt not only that the defendants committed the act, but that they did so knowing that their actions were seriously wrong, rather than just merely naughty or mischievous. To overcome the presumption of doli in capax, the prosecution relied on a combination of psychological evaluations, behavioral analysis, and the calculated nature of the timeline. Expert child psychiatrists testified regarding the cognitive abilities of the defendants. The prosecution argued that the boys' actions on the day of the incident, specifically their attempts to deceive the adult witnesses who questioned them, demonstrated a clear and present understanding of guilt and a desire to conceal their actions. The careful navigation through the city, the avoidance of direct authority figures, and the physical evidence linking them to the remote location were presented as proof of a deliberate, conscious plan. The defense teams faced an almost insurmountable challenge. They attempted to contextualize the boys' behavior within the framework of their troubled backgrounds, emphasizing their youth, their lack of emotional regulation, and the chaotic environments in which they were raised. The defense argued that the boys were essentially functioning in a state of juvenile fantasy, incapable of comprehending the fatal reality of their actions. The courtroom was transformed into a somber theater, where the darkest aspects of human psychology were dissected under the clinical light of jurisprudence. The presentation of the forensic evidence to the jury was a pivotal moment in the trial. The forensic scientists took the stand, guiding the jury through the intricate details of Locard's exchange principle. They explained how the microscopic fibers transferred between the victim and the perpetrators. They detailed the chemical analysis of the blue modeling paint, projecting charts and graphs to illustrate the perfect chemical match. They presented the footwear impressions, showing how the specific wear patterns on the soles of the boys' shoes mirrored the marks left at the scene. This objective, scientific testimony stripped away the emotional complexities of the boys' youth and anchored the jury to the undeniable physical facts of the event. The physical setup of the courtroom itself became a point of historical contention. The boys were seated in a raised dock, a standard feature of adult criminal courts, which made them visible to the entire gallery, the press, and the victim's family. The sight of two small children, barely tall enough to see over the wooden railing, facing the immense machinery of the state justice system, created a deeply unsettling visual paradox. It forced society to confront the uncomfortable intersection of childhood innocence and profound criminality. After weeks of grueling testimony, the presentation of exhaustive forensic evidence, and intense legal arguments over the nature of moral responsibility, the case was handed to the jury. The burden placed upon these everyday citizens was immense. They were asked to set aside their natural protective instincts toward children and evaluate the cold, hard facts of the forensic pathology and the trace evidence. On November 24, 1993, the jury returned their verdict. Both John Venables and Robert Thompson were found guilty. The judge, in delivering the sentence, noted the unprecedented nature of the case and the unparalleled tragedy it represented. The boys were ordered to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, a legal designation used for juvenile offenders that essentially amounts to an indefinite sentence until they are deemed no longer a danger to society. The immediate aftermath of the verdict was characterized by a profound sense of national mourning, coupled with a deep, existential unease. The case had broken a fundamental societal taboo. The realization that children could perpetrate such actions forced a nationwide reevaluation of everything from parenting and education to the influence of media and the structure of the juvenile justice system. The legacy of the James Bulger investigation is vast and enduring. From a purely investigative standpoint, the case served as a massive catalyst for the expansion of CCTV technology. The realization that grainy security footage was the linchpin in solving the disappearance led to a massive influx of funding for public surveillance systems. Today, the United Kingdom has one of the most extensive CCTV networks in the world, a direct technological evolution spurred by the tragic events in Bootle. The case demonstrated the undeniable value of visual timelines in modern policing, transforming how municipal security is designed and implemented. Forensically, the case stands as a landmark example of how trace evidence can secure a conviction even when the suspects are completely outside the standard psychological profile. The meticulous recovery of the blue paint, the fiber transfers, and the footwear analysis set new benchmarks for crime scene processing. It reinforced the necessity of treating every environment, no matter how remote or industrial, with the highest level of scientific rigor. The protocols developed and refined during this investigation are still studied by forensic academies globally. Legally, the trial initiated a massive debate regarding the concept of doli incapax. The public outrage over the defense's use of this historical presumption eventually led to significant legislative changes. In 1998, the Crime and Disorder Act formally abolished the presumption of doli incapax in England and Wales. This meant that children aged 10 to 13 would no longer be automatically presumed incapable of committing a crime, fundamentally altering the landscape of juvenile justice and ensuring that the legal system could more effectively address serious offenses committed by minors. Beyond the forensic and legal ramifications, the most profound legacy of this tragedy is the impact on child safety advocacy. Denise Fergus, James's mother, channeled her unfathomable grief into a lifelong mission to protect others. She established the James Bulger Memorial Trust, an organization dedicated to supporting young people who are disadvantaged, victims of crime, or struggling with bullying. The trust funds holidays, provides educational support, and create safe environments for children to thrive. Through this organization, the memory of a vibrant 2-year-old boy has been transformed into a beacon of hope and protection for thousands of other children. The investigation into the loss of James Bulger remains a watershed moment in the annals of true crime. It is a case that possesses no clear villains in the traditional sense, only a complex web of societal failures, psychological anomalies, and a devastating loss of innocence. The meticulous police work, the groundbreaking application of forensic science, and the subsequent legal restructuring all stem from the briefest moment of separation in a crowded shopping center. As we reflect on the meticulous forensic analysis, the psychological complexities of the juvenile suspects, and the sweeping legal reforms that followed, we are left to ponder the delicate fabric of our communities. The systems we have put in place, the cameras that watch our streets, the scientific principles that analyze our footprints, and the laws that govern our morality are all designed to prevent history from repeating itself. But as we navigate our daily lives, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of modern society, we must ask ourselves, in our reliance on technology and the justice system, have we maintained the personal, collective vigilance required to truly protect the most vulnerable among us?